Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, new evidence. A key witness in the Eddie Gallagher war crimes trial says he killed the ISIS prisoner, not Gallagher. A live report on what happened on the stand and why the sailor says he did it. Plus, San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer is back in San Diego after meeting with President Trump. He shares how they touched on some of the city's biggest issues. And transferring nuclear waste out of the San Onofre power plant resumes. We take a look at the impact to our coastline. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening. It's Thursday, June 20th. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. The murder trial for a Navy SEAL accused of killing a prisoner takes a turn. A witness says he killed the teen, not Eddie Gallagher. KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh joins us now. Steve, what happened?
Well, Ebony, this just never happens in court. You can call it a bombshell. You can say it's like a Hollywood movie, but rarely would you ever see something like this in court. Special Operator Corey Scott, who was with Gallagher in Iraq in 2017, he took the stand and he said that he was the one, not Gallagher, who killed the wounded teenage ISIS fighter that they had been treating. Scott is a prosecution witness, keep in mind. He's a witness for the prosecutor. Originally, he said what the prosecutors expected him to say, that he saw Gallagher stab the wounded fighter in the neck. In fact, he showed us in his downward motion saying that there was no medical reason for him to do that. And then, though, but under questioning by the defense, Scott then said that he put his thumb on the prisoner's breathing tube and asphyxiated him. He said it was a mercy killing. Now, of course, prosecutors were livid. Scott is a key witness for the prosecutors. He said Scott didn't say any of this to investigators for NCIS or to prosecutors in the months leading up to this trial. Scott has immunity, but he can still be prosecuted for perjury in this case. Defense attorney Tim Parlatore said he didn't know in advance that Scott would say this. Obviously, the Gallagher family was jubilant in this case. They were outside the courtroom after this happened. He and his wife and children were embracing. Now, we also have a statement, though, from the Navy, and where it says that the government will not be dropping premeditated murder charges against Chief Petty Officer Gallagher, despite Petty Officer Scott's testimony. The credibility of a witness will be up to the jury to decide. Now, on the stand, Scott said that he didn't want Gallagher to go to jail for life, that he had a wife and children. Now, but keep in mind, he's also charged with shooting an elderly man and a young woman. And there are other SEALs scheduled to testify against their former commander. Reporting from Naval Base San Diego, Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
Thanks, Steve. Gun shows are once again allowed at the Del Mar Fairgrounds, at least for now. Last year, the board voted to suspend gun shows. KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman is in Del Mar with more on the judge's decision. Matt.
Yeah, Ebony, right now the state-owned Fairgrounds is hosting the San Diego County Fair. It's going on behind me, but soon gun shows could be coming back to Del Mar. Now, an attorney for Crossroads of the West, they used to host 5 gun shows a year here. They say that they're looking to host at least 1 gun show this year, and this is all coming after a judge issued a preliminary injunction saying the Fairgrounds board must allow gun shows. Last year, there were hundreds of people who turned out to meetings speaking for and against the gun shows. Those against the show say they didn't represent the beliefs of the community and weren't family-friendly, while the gun show operators argued it was a constitutionally protected right. There was also the issue of safety raised by the Fairgrounds board. The board president asserted that gun shows were unsafe, with felons in possession of firearms at the Fairgrounds sending their spouses in to buy guns. The gun shows do not deny there have been arrests and say that's why they hire law enforcement for their events. KPBS did a comparison of other events at the Fairgrounds in 2018, like the Fair and Kaboo Music Festival, which had significantly more arrests than the gun shows. Now, ultimately last year, though, the board voted to suspend the gun shows. Gun show advocates say the recent ruling allowing them back at the state-owned Fairgrounds is a win.
It's a regional asset that's owned by the state. It doesn't just belong to one group of people. So it's meant to be used by the entire region, which is San Diego County. We're all taxpayers. We're all Californians. So if to have one small minority group who wants to use the force of government to kick another group out of town or step on their First Amendment rights to assemble and free speech just because they don't like their culture, that's exactly what courts are supposed to do, is step in and make sure that they don't use the force of government to discriminate against a culture.
California Assemblymember Todd Gloria is pushing a bill that would ban the sale of guns and ammo on the fairgrounds. He issued a statement saying, in part, the ruling was disappointing, but that his bill would continue to move forward. Now, back out here live at the fairgrounds, the last gun show that was held here was in December. And since that time, obviously, the gun show has filed litigation, but they've also been looking at other locations to host the gun shows. Now, the one thing they say, though, is that most of the other locations they've checked out, they're just simply not big enough. And Crossroads of the West says after this preliminary injunction was filed, they've already been in touch with fairground staff. They're looking to schedule a show. They put in a request for some dates, and now they're going to see if they're able to get one here before the end of 2019. Back to you, Ebony.
So, Matt, did the board make it clear that this suspension was always going to be temporary?
Right, so we knew that there was just going to be a temporary suspension. That was for all of 2019. While the board went back and reviewed its gun show policy, they were basically looking to see if they could host gun shows that didn't have actual ammunition or actual guns at the fairgrounds. Now, if you talk to the gun show operators, they say a gun show without guns and without ammunition simply isn't a gun show. And we should have a resolution to all this to see whether or not the fairgrounds board can actually ban the gun shows or not have gun shows at the state fairgrounds. This whole thing with the federal judge is expected to wrap up by the end of September. Live here in Del Mar, Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
Thanks, Matt. The city of San Diego is putting more money towards cleanup. The funding increase was included in the budget signed by Mayor Kevin Faulconer today. KPBS reporter Max Rivlin Nadler was there as Faulconer discussed this, plus his recent meeting with President Trump.
The new city budget will add $6.5 million more than last year to create a second shift of street cleaning and litter removal crews so the city could respond to complaints 24 hours a day. Faulconer was joined by City Councilwoman Vivian Moreno, who has championed the Clean SD initiative. After he signed the budget, I asked the mayor about his meeting with Trump, which took place a day after Trump threatened to arrest 1 million illegal aliens. Faulconer said the subject didn't come up, and instead the two discussed the importance of Congress passing a proposed trade deal with the U.S. known as the USMCA.
We really had the opportunity to focus a brief time on USMCA and how important trade is here in San Diego, and 100,000 jobs that are at stake.
Faulconer also said he told the president that any tariffs on trade would be damaging for San Diego's economy. He said tariffs are the wrong way to go and that free trade works for San Diego. Earlier this month, Trump used the threat of increased tariffs to make Mexico pledge that it would take more steps to stem the flow of Central American immigrants across its southern border. Max Rivlin-Nadler, KPBS News.
Thanks, Max. Today is World Refugee Day, a day to spread awareness about refugees around the world. It coincides with a new report that shows refugee resettlement in the U.S. is at a historic low. KPBS reporter Priya Sridhar has the data.
The International Rescue Committee, a global nonprofit dedicated to refugee resettlement, released a new report this week showing that the United States has lowered its annual admissions for refugees by 1/3 this fiscal year compared to last. This year, the U.S. has committed to taking only 30,000 refugees, despite resettlement needs increasing by 17%, according to the report. It also shows that while admissions from Africa, East Asia, and Europe are nearly complete for this fiscal year, admissions from Latin America, the Caribbean, and South Asia have barely begun. Admissions from those regions will likely reach 1/5 of their ceilings.
We know the numbers from each resettlement agencies, and their approval rate is going really down. Now we see 2-3 per agency, 2-3 arrivals per agency, and the thing that we know, there are a lot of people who are really suffering.
The forum is hosting a World Refugee Day celebration to honor the culture of San Diego's refugees this Saturday at 11 a.m. at the YMCA in City Heights. Priya Sridhar, KPBS News.
Thanks, Priya. North County residents are raising concerns. They live close to the shuttered San Onofre nuclear power plant. KPBS science and technology reporter Shalina Chatlani looks into whether storing 1,700 tons of nuclear waste on the beach is safe.
We're here at the San Onofre State Beach, where you can see beachgoers, surfers, and even some dogs playing. But while you're here, you'll also be able to see the massive San Onofre nuclear generating station. It's been out of use since 2013, but there are still over 1,000 tons of spent nuclear waste here. And that has a lot of people in the area worried, like Oceanside resident Peter McBride.
Nobody's talked about the half-life of the nuclear waste that's there.
At a recent San Onofre community engagement panel, he and others said the canisters are too thin, and with the salt air, they'll corrode and break open. Some also say the rising ocean levels could smother the canisters in water.
Other areas of the country face the same kind of irresponsibility with such a potentially disastrous material. And I'm worried about our children, my grandson.
But how dangerous is this nuclear fuel? Randall Granis is the senior nuclear engineer at San Onofre. He says any danger would come right after the rods are removed from the reactor because they are extremely hot. That's why they're put in wet cooling ponds.
After 5 years, we can transfer it into this dry storage system, and that's adequate just using the natural convection to cool the fuel.
Granis says vents help cool the spent fuel. But spent nuclear fuel is still highly radioactive, and some of that radiation travels. It can go through materials like aluminum and human beings, but can be stopped by concrete and steel. This radiation can take years to become less of a problem.
So if you had no shielding between our fuel and yourself, it could be fatal, right, in a relatively short period of time. So it is important to maintain that shielding. Now, if you fast forward several hundred years from now, you can walk up to one of those fuel assemblies and for a short period of time and you'll be fine.
But we can't fast forward, and that's why residents are worried.
I still don't understand what's going on.
What would happen if this shielding suddenly went away?
There's a loaded canister inside of there about 4 feet deep from this level here. We have this massive lid on here that's filled with concrete. This is the inlet vent here. So the cool air comes in.
Granis says the canisters are buried about 20 feet underground in a concrete pad with a 35,000-pound lid on top. But back in January, we interviewed physicist Tom English at the San Onofre State Beach. He's very skeptical this system could hold up in an ocean environment.
That it'll be about 100 feet from the water and a few inches above the groundwater table, which is totally ridiculous. So what could happen is, as the sea level rises, what will happen is the bottom of the containers will corrode.
Jim Conca, a nuclear waste storage consultant for SoCal Edison, says there's little risk of a breach. He was on the San Onofre tour. People are still very concerned about issues like the ocean being here. In California, we have wildfires that happen pretty often, and some people have even brought up the concern of terrorism. So what do you say to those people?
Well, these are totally fireproof. I mean, fire is not going to do anything to this. Flooding isn't going to do anything to this. Terrorism is the least issue because each of these weighs 150 tons. It's not like you're going to back a pickup truck, cut through the fence, and throw this in the back of the truck and drive away. One other concern has been earthquakes. Yeah, these are rated for earthquakes. There's not much can happen to them. There's some concern about sea level rise. What do you think would happen here if... Well, it's going to take a long time for that sea level to rise anywhere near this. I also asked about corrosion. While we were at the plant, we saw rust on some of the metal, and rust causes metal to break apart. Conca says the fuel canisters are made of a special steel that resists rust. At the end of the tour, we even measured our clothing to check for radiation levels. We were fine. But to get a second opinion on SoCal Edison's claims, we spoke to Ted Quinn. He's the former president of the nonprofit American Nuclear Society.
The NRC has stated that there is no credible accident that occurred with our dry casks with the age of the fuel, which is older now.
But he says there's a caveat. San Onofre wasn't built to store spent nuclear fuel in the long term.
The role of San Onofre is done. It no longer produces electricity. It's being taken down, and the California Public Utility Commission oversees the funds for taking it down, and the only thing that'll be left will be the canisters. And there's no reason for them to be there if the federal government fulfills their role.
He says there have to be employees looking over the site for as long as the canisters are there. Back at San Onofre, Conca agreed, saying there needs to be permanent storage underground.
And that's because, you know, I love the pyramids, they're great, but that's the only thing humans have made that lasted, you know, anything approaching geologic time.
The federal government was supposed to provide a solution decades ago, but it still hasn't. So these nuclear experts say what's preventing a permanent, safer solution for San Onofre and plants around the country is less scientific and more political. Shalina Chatlani, KPBS News.
President Trump says he wants to avoid a confrontation with Iran even after an American drone was shot down. Iran says the drone was flying in its airspace. The U.S. military says that's not the case and that the drone was flying over international waters. President Trump says he believes the attack was a mistake.
I find it hard to believe it was intentional, if you want to know the truth. I think that it could have been somebody who was loose and stupid that did it. But we'll be able to report back, and you'll understand exactly what happened. But it was a very foolish move. That I can tell you.
This is the latest in a string of incidents with Iran. The U.S. says Iran also attacked 2 commercial oil tankers earlier this month. San Francisco could soon become the first city in the U.S. to ban all sales of electronic cigarettes. Here's more on the vote that could change the direction of vaping in California.
We spent the 90s battling big tobacco, and now we see its new form through e-cigarettes. I'm not going to put profits of big tobacco over the health of our children and our young people.
San Francisco supervisors voted unanimously on Tuesday to move the city toward banning all sales of electronic cigarettes. Supervisors approved a measure to stop the sale and distribution of e-cigarettes until the Food and Drug Administration completes a review of the effects of e-cigarettes on public health.
The ordinance is not a permanent ban. It is a moratorium until due diligence is carried out by the FDA concerning big tobacco companies like Juul's marketing to our youth. Companies like Juul have had 3 years to submit their product and marketing to the FDA. The question is, why haven't they? And the answer is because they want to protect their profits to continue targeting and harming our young people, and they know nicotine is not healthy.
They also supported a ban on manufacturing e-cigarettes on city property as they move to crack down on teen vaping. Supervisor Shaman Walton introduced the measures, and they will require another vote before becoming law. But small business owners say the ban will have a big impact on their livelihoods and will increase black market sales of e-cigarettes in the city.
Well, actually, we are in shock because our main business as a cigarette shop is to sell the e-cigarette and all kinds of tobacco products.
They also claim teens are more likely to buy e-cigarettes online than in stores where they know they'll get carded.
The kids are still smoking, and they're getting it not through our small businesses here. Actually, they go online.
San Francisco supervisors voted unanimously on Tuesday to move the city towards banning all sales of electronic cigarettes. Supervisors approved a measure to stop the sale and distribution of e-cigarettes until the Food and Drug Administration completes a review of the effects of e-cigarettes on public health. The remains of a U.S. soldier presumed dead in North Korea are finally home. William Hoover Jones fought in the Korean War more than 60 years ago. He was reported missing in action in North Korea in 1950. The Army declared him dead in 1953. Jones was identified last year after North Korea turned over 55 boxes containing remains of U.S. service members killed during the war. Today, his remains were received by his family in North Carolina.
It was an emotional time for me, and it's something I will never forget. These gentlemen take their time, volunteer to take their time. These Patriots guys take their time. I'm very humble all this going on.
He will be remembered in a ceremony at the state capitol tomorrow.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, rising tensions in the Persian Gulf as Iran shoots down a U.S. drone. Coming up at 7, right after Evening Edition on KPBS.
San Diego may need to come up with more than $350 million to protect its coastline by 2040. This according to a new study. KPBS science and technology reporter Shalina Chatlani explains the research.
That's right, Ebony. Then the number is actually a low estimate, according to researchers at the Center for Climate Integrity. The study projects the state of California will have to pay around $22 billion by 2040. The same estimate is over $400 billion for the nation. I spoke to Richard Wiles, the executive director at the center. He said they looked at the baseline cost of building a seawall in communities across the country, and those figures ran high in coastal cities like San Diego.
Within 10, 15, 20 years, a lot of these places are going to be experiencing flooding on a routine basis, so much that it'll cause, significant economic damage. People's homes will be flooded 3-4 times a year. Businesses will be underwater 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 times a year. That's not sustainable. So these expenses have to happen now in order to get the defenses in place by the time the sea has risen, which is basically now.
Wiles says it's still unclear where the money to pay for this infrastructure will come from. He says now the cost is largely on taxpayers, but he thinks polluting companies should have to share the burden. Shalina Chatlani, KPBS News.
Another cloudy day in San Diego. Can we expect a clear up for the weekend? Meteorologist Dajia Swad has the answer.
We're tracking out windy conditions tonight across the mountains and deserts. That will continue into your Friday morning. And for Friday morning, well, that marks the first day of summer. As we head into the weekend, we'll notice a more offshore flow, meaning a bit less cloud cover and drizzle potential, and also warmer conditions. So for tonight, once again, we are under a wind advisory out to Borrego Springs into Pine Valley. With that being said, we are going to notice some blowing dust through tonight into tomorrow morning. This advisory lasts until 7 a.m. tomorrow. So if you do plan to be out and about driving in this region and the deserts and mountains, keep that in mind. Reduced visibility and the crosswinds also going to be very difficult, especially for high profile vehicles. Now for tonight, spotty drizzle at the coast and looking at that late as well with a low of 63. We'll be looking at a similar forecast as well for Oceanside with a low of 62. Going to notice some clouds in Borrego Springs with a low of 66, and also noticing the clouds moving into Mount Laguna with a low of 54. Winds will be gusting upwards to 50 miles per hour. So with that being said, do drive cautiously tonight into tomorrow morning. And this is because we have a disturbance coming in from the north that is bringing in cooler air, and ahead of it, windy conditions continue to usher warmer air into the Four Corners and even into the South Central. What that means for us is we'll notice low clouds still in place for San Diego as well as Oceanside, looking at a high of 71 tomorrow. San Diego looking at a high of 68, 92 in Borrego Springs. Still going to be looking at some cloud cover in Mount Laguna with a high of 67. But by the weekend, yes, there's still going to be some cool spots across the West Coast. However, here in Southern California, we start to notice an offshore flow, and that's going to allow for temperatures to rise. Not really going to see a huge temperature change at the coast, remaining in the lower 70s for the next several days. But inland areas, you're in the low, the mid 70s Saturday, and then into the 80s Sunday and into your Monday. Still calling for some low clouds. Desert areas back into the triple digits over the weekend with that offshore flow, and looking at plenty of sunshine, and also be calling for more sun and warmer conditions in the mountains with a high of 73 for the end of the weekend. Reporting for KPBS News, I'm your meteorologist, Dajia Swad. Back to you.
Now for a recap of tonight's top stories. The murder trial for a Navy SEAL accused of killing an ISIS prisoner takes a turn. Eddie Gallagher is charged with multiple war crimes, including killing an Islamic State prisoner while he was deployed in Iraq in 2017. Today, a key witness said he killed the teen, not Eddie Gallagher. First-class Petty Officer Corey Scott testified that Gallagher did stab the ISIS fighter, but he suffocated him. Gun shows are once again allowed at the Del Mar Fairgrounds, at least for now. Last year, the board voted to temporarily suspend the gun shows. But this week, a federal judge decided the Fairgrounds board must allow the shows. The city of San Diego is putting more money towards cleanup. The $6.5 million increase was included in the budget signed by Mayor Kevin Faulconer today. The funding will create a second shift of street cleaning and litter removal so that the city can respond to complaints within 24 hours a day. Here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. On Morning Edition, the war crime trial for Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher continues. Where does it go now after today's testimony? And on Midday Edition, the Not So Silent Film Festival is kicking off. How the influences of women filmmakers. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.